Well, thanks for stopping by the 33 Kings studio to hang with your old buddy Uncle Jay. Now, I understand and I realize that there are Bigfoot stories galore, but there's a lot of times that, well, most of them are pretty calm. No attacks, no violence. It scares the heck out of people, absolutely. But this encounter, well, these things had malintent. Well, they even killed the family dogs once. So I'm glad you're here. Set a spell, cook your family meal, do whatever you do when you listen to Uncle Jay, and enjoy this story about a terrifying Bigfoot in Kentucky. Well, I must say, it's a beautiful day in the hills of Kentucky, and the temperatures are starting to rise, and, well, May's a beautiful time. I finally got a chance to go to an old family farm pond that I haven't been able to go fishing in years in. And as far as I know, well, no one had fished the actual pond in probably at least 40 years. Now, well, what I'm calling a pond, I guess one could actually say it's a mini lake of about 2 acres, nestled in a holler that's spring fed, and the land's been in my family for years. And I was left, well, it was left to me and my siblings, but we all moved away, and, well, the land was never kept up and become horribly overgrown, and some of the spooky tales of some of the creatures that had terrorized the locals for years, well, none of the family was really interested in bothering with keeping it up much, so most of the land, well, it's mountainous, got a mountainous terrain, and not really good for grazing cattle or anything of that nature, and the only good bottom land that really exists is, well, it's down by the lake. Nothing you could really grow anything on and ever make money, but you could grow enough to keep you sustained and help your family like my grandfather and my great-grandfather did, but, well, it's more like a marsh is what I guess you could call it. Well, as a young kid, I'd spend as much time as I could with my grandparents. And in the summer when school was out, I was there just about all the time. Now, at that time, they raised chickens, some goats. They kept the goats just so they could keep some of the overgrowth down, and a few pigs for winter slaughter because, well, they raised what they ate, canned everything that they raised in their garden. And, well, I didn't get to come from a wealthy family by no means. I guess you could say, well, pretty much, we were tillers of the land. And I was around probably 10 years old when I moved away, and it just became an inconvenience for my parents to send me for the summer because, well, my father was in the military, and so we moved around a great deal. But now when I was there, I'd always listen to all the stories that all the old folks would tell around the campfires and stuff, and, well, back in times like that, we used to do a lot of porch sitting. But I remember hearing the talk, and everybody talked about some kind of creature. They always described it as just a big, tall, hairy fella because, well, at that time, well, there was no Bigfoot because this was around about 1960. And, well, the Bigfoot monster, he hadn't gained any recognition at the time. So Pat wasn't real sure what to call it other than, well, what they described, just a 8-foot tall, covered, hairy man. Now, as a kid, this was one of the greatest stories I'd ever heard, and it just, well, it intrigued me. But as for my brother and sister, well, they didn't really like it much. They was mostly little city kids, and, well, they wasn't interested in the country life at all. Well, not me. There was nothing about me, big city. I was over the hills and through the woods and down the valleys and the creeks I'd go. But now I was small back then for my age, and, well, I wasn't really big enough to do any work, so really wasn't no benefit around Grandpap and Granny, but, well, they'd try to get me to do as much as they could and stuff, so I was mostly in the way, so I'd usually just go play and I'd go fishing. Well, I got to be a pretty good fisherman, I might say, and, well, Granny'd cook 'em and clean 'em for dinner, and every time I'd cook 'em, and, man, that made me feel like a big boy because, well, Pap would always say, looky here, looky yonder what this boy's done went and caught for supper. Well, Ma, we don't have to worry about food with this kind of little fisherman around. Well, boy, when he'd say stuff like that, you talking about a little feller puffing his chest out and just parading around, because, well, I was thinking, boy, I'm doing something here. I'm bringing home dinner for the family. Well, that made me want to fish even more. As I got older a little bit, as I realized that, well, got a feeling Pat was pretty sick of fish, because there's a few times I'd come in, he'd just look at Ma and say, Ma, I'm pretty sure it's about time we teach this young man to squirrel hunt a bit. Well, of course, after he said that, me being a young kid, I was aggravating him from the very beginning. Now, old Pap, he had some coon dogs and, well, squirrel dogs. He loved to hunt. So I kept bugging him to let me go, and so he did. Well, I'll just say I didn't last long because, well, I talked too much, and, well, I get tripped up, and I'd fall a lot. And he'd just kind of grin and look at me. He said, boy, I guess you're just a little too light in the britches for that right now, he'd say. Now, he'd never say anything mean or hateful, but he just kind of had a way about him that he very gently make you understand. He said, right now, we'll stick with fishing. Well, back in those days, well, coon hunting was a pretty popular thing, and, well, my grandfather and one of his friends from World War II used to raise hunting dogs. Well, I remember one particular night that Pat and his buddy went hunting, and, well, let me just say that night changed everything for my grandmother and his friend, because he never went back into the woods ever again. Anyway, me and my grandmother, we was just sitting there one night, and we just got through fixing some marshmallows on the fire, and she was telling me a story. And all of a sudden, my Pap and his pal came and just slammed through the door as if something was just chasing them for their very dear life. You could see the fear and the terror in both of their eyes, and they were both so out of breath they couldn't say anything. Pap just breathlessly just kept saying, they got the dogs. They got the dogs. They had got the dogs. And my granny said, who in the world are you talking about? Who's got the dogs? It was at that moment Pap saw me looking right at him, and seeing that he and his friend were both white as sheets and shaking like leaves in a windstorm. I have to tell you, these two men were the toughest men I'd ever known in my life, and still the toughest that I've ever met to this day. Both had survived World War II, stormed the beach at Normandy at the same time, and yet here they are, standing in a living room, armed to the hilt, and both of them scared to death. Well, as a little fella, I'll just tell you right now, my eyes was as big as two big old ripe oranges. Well, I'm going to tell you something right now, man. This story right here, well, it caused my eyes to get as big as oranges. This is truly probably one of the most terrifying Bigfoot encounters I have ever heard before. Now, if you like what old Uncle Jay's doing, do me a favor. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. That way you don't miss anything. And I don't know if you notice or not, but does that not look like kind of like somebody in the drive-thru at McDonald's? Even though the menu hasn't changed in 50 years? And both my pap and his buddy took two big deep breaths and began gathering themselves. And they had a seat. And I was already having a seat because I didn't want to miss a word. Pap looked at my granny, at which by this time I'd already inchwormed my way into her lap and was, well, probably as close as I could ever get to anyone. He looked at us with both the dead serious look that I'd ever seen in my life and said, "Young man, you're never to go into these woods hunting, fishing, to get water, to do anything without me or someone else looking after you. Do you understand?" Now, not with one thought. I was in agreement already without even knowing what exactly they'd seen. That, well, I'm not going out there without somebody being right beside me. Well, all I have to say, that old creature, that big hairy man people claim's always been here, well, we saw him tonight. Them, my granny and I said simultaneously. Yeah, there was at least four of them, my grandfather's friend said, still in a shaky voice. Pap said 4 for sure, well, maybe more. Well, the dogs was on at first what we thought was a coon. And they tracked, well, probably a right smart piece. I'm thinking they probably tracked at least a mile and a half. And then all of a sudden, nothing. Just a really unsettling, still, cold feeling. No crickets chirping, no frogs hollering, nothing. Just a cold silence. The only noise was us walking, trying to find out where the dogs were now because they just stopped. Then as we was walking more, we started hearing the dogs whimper, like they were hurt, scared, circling around, trying to get back. We kept following the sound till we heard one of the dogs just yelp. And then me and Vern here, we decided to turn the lights on. And then to our fright, about 30 yards away, was what only can be described as 4 big, tall, hairy men. Which they don't look like us. They didn't look like us. 7 to 8 feet tall. Just completely covered in hair. And all 4 of them had one of the dogs in their hands. And then they let out this big violent scream. And they slammed the dogs on the ground and started slinging them around and slapping them against trees. That roar, that screech, that howl. I don't even know how to describe it, Pap said. We just turned and ran. I didn't even look back. No, Pap or his buddy they never even talked about it again. But I remember as a kid, after the end of their story, I remember asking, why didn't you guys shoot at them? They had a puzzled look, but they never did answer. And I never brought it up again, and I don't remember anyone ever having any other encounters. Not only that, back in that time, mentioning something like that, seeing something like that type of creature, well, my goodness, boys, back in the 60s, well, you get labeled as kooky, crazy, strange. Now, of course, you hear about this kind of thing all the time now. You've got television programs dedicated to finding these things. Now, before I even made the decision to move here, I had to have a new road cut in, had to have some timber cleared, way before I could even get back to the old home place. Now, we're looking at least 40 years of overgrowth since Pap died. And the old home place that I spent so much time in when I was a kid, well, it just fell in on its foundation. Now, I had the electric turned on and the water fixed before I even come there, and I had a septic tank dug. But, well, I was just traveling in an RV because, well, it's myself. I don't need nothing else. And my main focus was fishing in that lake that nobody had touched in ever. Now, jokingly in my mind, I had it built up that, man, there's fish in there probably with white beards and probably swimming with a cane. Well, yeah, you know how you build things up, but you know what? There's some big fish in there. But unfortunately, well, the lake had grown up, and there was a lot of overgrowth on the outside, but you best believe that first day I hit the lake. And the lake itself, well, it wasn't horribly overgrown, but the bank, well, there's some trees that had fallen in, and, well, you know what that does? That just creates a perfect habitat for fish. Well, I'd made it to the property that day, and I got everything hooked up, and I was just ready for the next day. Now, after looking at the lake, I knew it was kind of grown up and stuff, but usually a lake of this size, well, it'll be okay, and even if the fish get overpopulated, well, the survival of the fittest, if you will take care of everything. So I jumped up that next morning, ready to go to the lake to fulfill my dreams that I'd had over 40 years. Now, I hadn't been on the lake, probably about an hour. Well, it was just like I'd dreamed and envisioned all those years. Most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. A big whiz of catching a big fish. And right then my fishing pole bent double. And on the other end of that hook, well, that was the biggest largemouth I'd ever seen in my life. And right then I heard my pap's very words. Boy, just catch enough to fill your belly. The lake will provide the rest. Ain't no need in catching more than you need. Anyway, I made it back to the RV. Now, I'd built the fire just before I'd left that morning to get on the lake, just in case I'd caught breakfast. Anyway, I got the boat on the bank and I tied it to a tree and I started walking toward the fire that I'd built that morning. But I noticed there was no smoke coming from the fire. Now, as I got closer, I noticed that the wood that I'd stacked previously that morning had been knocked over, and the fire itself looked to have been beaten out with, well, what appeared to be a larger log. Now, at this point, I started questioning my memory from the morning of whether was I so excited about catching a big fish that maybe I started to build the fire, and, well, and in my excitement, I went fishing without getting it completely built. Well, now, I didn't really think much more of it as my hunger had started outweighing my curiosity and my confusion. Now, where I had the RV parked, My fire pit and where I cook is, well, we're pretty far, about right at about 150 yards from the lake. Now, by the time I got the fire started back, the fish cleaned and everything else, well, probably around noon. Now, the whole time I could hear large splashes coming from the lake. Now, a fish, I wouldn't think I could hear a splash from that far away, but, well, possibly it might be, since they were some pretty good fish. But I completely dismissed it simply because of the large trees leaning off the bank and, well, some of the limbs and the pine cones and things. Well, I just kind of thought it was that. Well, I settled in after getting my belly full. I kicked back looking around at everything that changed since I was a kid. Well, and just then I heard another big splash, followed by what sounded like muffled kids laughing, or, well, I don't know, some kind of chatter. Once again, I just played it off as birds, owls, maybe tree limbs falling in the water. But that evening I was in the bed, replaying the day, and, well, I started thinking back to the night that old Grandpap and his buddy encountered those things, creatures, Bigfoot, or whatever they were in the woods. But I kept thinking, well, man, that was a mile or more down the holler. And, well, that's so long ago, and probably whatever it was, well, it's bound to die from old age. But now, well, I went off to sleep. And I woke up the next morning eager to start the day and started building a fire. Didn't notice anything unusual until after I started the fire and started cooking breakfast. Now, the smoke started seeping through the woods that morning because it was damp, kind of foggy. Started rolling through the woods just about head high. And then I started hearing these low guttural growls. And then something started shaking the trees. And then I noticed everything stopped. No birds chirping, no anything. And then about an hour later, everything went back to normal. Now, for about a week, I didn't notice any noise, any splashing, anything in the night, nothing like that. Everything was clear. The fishing was great. The hunting was even better. And I was really starting to really love the decision that I'd made to come back home. Well, I'd really started getting settled in. Been here at the old home place for about a month. Been fishing, hunting, everything was great. Finally started getting a little garden planted, and I was ready to settle in for the winter. I'd had dinner that afternoon, and, well, I got my good belly full and started reading a book. And I got an RV and settled in and was ready to go to sleep. And then all of a sudden, the RV just violently shook, and I was woke up, startled unbelievably. Now you got to realize this is a 28-foot RV. I drive it. It's pretty hard to shake. So I gathered myself for a moment after being startled from a deep sleep, thinking, wow, geez, this must be a wind, must be a storm really picking up. Then all of a sudden everything just started shaking, whipping back and forth, and I had to sit back down in the chair. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what's going on? And then I hear these screams, these howls, scratches, bangs, and slams on the RV. Holy crap, that's when my mind went back to, are these the things that my grandfather and his friend encountered when I was a kid? I couldn't tell how many of these things that they actually were. It seemed that they were all around. I was trying to look out the windows, but there was no moon to illuminate the night. So I finally just decided I'm going to open a window. And I opened the window, stuck my hand out with a .45 that I had, and fired 2 or 3 shots. Now I could see there was at least 6 or 7 of these things running around. And they'd run away, and they'd come up, and then they'd slam against the RV. And after I fired the shots and stuff, everything went dead silent. Now, needless to say, I didn't sleep anymore that night. And I left bright and early that morning. And about 2 weeks later, I sold that property to the man that owned the property adjacent to this one. And I've never looked back. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, that's probably one of the most scariest Bigfoot encounters old Uncle Jay's ever heard. Now, if you got some scary tales that you want to send in, well, send them into the studio. I'm going to leave the link in the description box. And, well, if you like what old Uncle Jay's doing, do me a favor. Hit that like, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. That way you don't miss anything. And, well, there's no obligation to you, and it just helps the channel grow. And it throws us up better in YouTube's algorithm, I ain't going to lie. So hit that like, too. And we'll see you next time.